Good evening. So I'll begin with the greetings on the International Yoga Day. And we have been sitting whole day. So let's do one simple exercise of yoga. Can you please all stand up? Can you please stand up? Hello? So a simple exercise, just put your hands up. And thank you very much. You can take your seats. This is enough for yoga for all the participants here. But I thought it's important to stir up and lose some energies and be more active. So once again, greetings on the International Yoga Day. We have discussed a lot of things on the energy transition, specific areas being affected by the energy transition. We'll be trying to discuss certain people matters. Who are all going to drive this energy transition, as also take new initiatives in the organization. So just to capture what all is happening and has happened in the energy sector is, number one, we should remember that energy is essential for life, is not consumed, it transforms its state or into objects. Our energy choices are very important because this has a direct impact on the ecosystem of the nature, and we are very much part of that. We need to do that. Also important is that the cost of energy is not just few dollars or cents. Please keep in mind, it is much more than that because it has direct impact, economic impact, social impact, environment impact, and so many other things. So actually the cost goes much higher on that. And therefore it is important to choose your energy sources very careful, and this cannot be done in isolation. We need to also align our energy policies, use of energy sources in line with the Sustainability Development Goals of the United Nations. And there are three of them which I like to make a mention, which have direct connection with the energy. The SDG 3rd, which calls about good health and well-being, is very important. The SDG 7, which is clean and affordable energy, is directly linked with our energy transition. And the climate change to limit the increase in the rise in the temperature, the SDG 13. These are the three SDG which are directly linking with the energy consumption, energy systems, energy policies of every country and also the individuals here. I am also reminded by a book written by Lester Brown, which entitled Plan 2B, in which he says that we all are in an ecosystem, and the world today, and including all of us, are consuming much more than what a Mother Earth can really regenerate. So we have about a decade's time to reverse this process. Otherwise, it's becoming irreversible and may lead to really irreversible situations, undesirable situations in the world. This year, 2023 is very significant because as per several studies, the emissions quantum is peaking this year, and after this, the emissions would start decreasing. This is the general studies done by several studies which have pointed out the overall global emissions scenario. Also, we should be conscious that several studies, several scenarios that have been put up have very clearly pointed out that by 2050, the primary sources of energy, if you see the scenario, would comprise of about 50% fossil and 50% non-fossil. So that's the kind of scenario. What are our companies doing? Are we really prepared for that? Particularly, this would be one of the area of discussion with the oil and gas companies in the country. Also, very clear trend is of electrification. Use of energy in the form of electrification is increasing, and again by around 2035, 38, this could reach almost about 50% of the energy source. When it comes to Indian subcontinent, we see that in the primary mix, fossil fuels will predominantly still be used. So this area of Indian continent would have about 500 million more people by 2050, and about 60% of the primary energy would still be a fossil. So I think we are, as a region, we are perhaps lagging behind in our pursuit to have clean energy. What are the other trends? Emergence of renewables. We have seen that in the presentation in the 2 days, and is replacing the fossil fuels here. Decarbonization, I think, is a very big agenda and very well accepted, and that is true for even oil and gas industry. Emergence of bioenergy, hydrogen and synthetic fuels is another area where it's very important, and we see in some of the areas, some of the initiatives that have been taken which are path-breaking to my mind is in Europe, for example. They say that by 2035 there would not be any manufacturing of the ICB engine vehicles. So this is very significant actually. We also need to see that carbon capture, storage, utilization is again an emerging area. Even the investors in the oil and gas field, fossil area fields, are becoming very, very selective. And they are looking at more openly and more closely cleaner fuel projects there. We see several new emerging technologies like MIT very recently really used carbon dioxide to convert into chemicals which can be used as fuels. Also, the major automobile manufacturer Audi and MAN Energy have come together to generate synthetic natural gas by having hydrogen and carbon dioxide through a methanation process. And they are setting up a 500 million liters capacity, their second plant in the world here. So there are many, many changes that are happening. Also, we should be conscious that if we really follow 1.5 degree temperature rise scenario, it would mean that we close down about oil and gas projects producing about 45 million barrels a day. This is the kind of scenario it means actually. So the oil and gas, what is the then charter or changed ways of oil and gas companies? They are looking at diversifying into biofuels, renewable powers, hydrogen, electrification, carbon capture, utilization storage, into voluntary carbon markets. There are a whole lot of business models are changing. They are diversifying, they are divesting on that. So if you see overall, even before COVID was there, the energy market in the world was undergoing a lot of changes, and many of the management gurus, had dubbed it as VUCA, as you say, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Some other new names came as RUPT, rapid, unpredictable, paradoxal, or tangled. Even BANI, which says brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible. These were the terminologies used by the experts, management gurus, to define the business environment in the world. And this kind of thing, this energy transition has actually added more new dimensions of that. I'm reminded of Ramcharan, the management guru, who said that all these changes are structural changes, which are going to be there for a long time. And in his book, in Attacker's Advantage, he says, how do you deal with them? That's very important. Either you really just give up and follow what is happening and be part of that, or you take an attacker's advantage. And that's what he has dealt with in this, which he calls for a predictive approach on that. So what kind of people are required actually in the industry to see that we have a smooth energy transition, we have a good energy policy, energy system here, whether we have people today, and what is the need in the future, what kind of business leaders, models that we needed, what skills, competencies, and approaches to the work or work style we need that. in organization, do we have such things or do we lack this? And is there any, any process or initiative to really meet these challenges? These are the issues that we are going to discuss today in this seminar, and we are very happy to have two experts, one from the private sector, a leading organization, Waaree, you know that. Would like to welcome Mr. Vivek Srivastava there, and also Mr. Ayush Gupta, Director HR of a leading, perhaps the leader in the country on the gas business here, whether transportation, marketing, or international trade of gas there. So we'll seek their opinion on how they are dealing, how they've steered their organization through this period, and what plans they have to really look at developing people, developing leaders, what new initiative they are taking in their organization. So we'll go through that. And first of all, I'd like both of you to really take a few minutes and share major aspects of in the last couple of years that the business has been very difficult in the COVID time, and after that we're trying to really come up again to that level, and what initiatives you think, how the people have been able to work on that. So this aspect. So I'll request Shri Ayush Gupta first to really speak on that. Mr. Ayush.
Good evening, everyone. And first of all, I think the moderator has made my job easier by explaining the context and giving a very good background of the times we are going through. And one way to describe, many of the people after the COVID started talking of the new normal. But the way we see, it's not the question of being in the new normal. I believe it's the new abnormal situation that we have to be prepared to live into. That where, whether we talk of VUCA, BANI, and all these terms, that it's uncertain. Every time, every moment in our life or the business is very much uncertain and unpredictable. So it's not the new normal, it's the new abnormal where the business has to strive, whether we talk of the energy security issues, the climate change issues. Suddenly a war happens and the entire energy security of the country or across the globe takes a hit, and you have to be prepared to deal with that situation overnight. So under these situations and the COVID, we have all seen how it changed the way we thought that the business can be done, the way the work can be done. And overnight we have to change our systems, processes, policies of how the work to be carried out. So if we look at into these kind of business scenarios that we are going through, a few of the things which I would like to share in terms of, say, if we talk of how to, as leaders, what are the challenges these situations pose. When we talked about the COVID, the new thing which all the leaders or the business professionals are dealing with, how to deal with the fear. What COVID brought us, or the biggest challenge for a business organization, was to deal with the fear, and which the organizations still today are facing with. Whether organizations were trying to shift from work from home to back to the office, they are really finding it difficult to get the people back into the office, even if they want. It's something not just with the comfort, but also something to deal with the fear among the people that something may happen again, and then what will happen. Another thing in terms of, if we talk of energy crisis, energy has always been a very, very volatile word and uncertain word, where the prices go haywire from $20 to $80 or $100 for the crude oil. So it's the uncertainty in terms of the availability and the prices, or the different sources from where the energy security has to be brought in. And energy is something which we can't live without it. So whatever cost it may come, it has to be procured, it has to be sourced, and it has to be supplied. And the latest crisis which happened because of the Ukraine war, again the European countries we saw, because of the certain sanctions being embarked, they tried to procure from all the sources and store it, and because of which other countries suffered and they had to buy, including India, where we had to source energy or gas at a much higher price than it would have been. And third, about the climate change, if we talk about, which is again part of the theme, is in terms of the climate choice, what has happened now, and we have been talking about climate change for last so many years, but not what has changed now is the sense of urgency to respond. Because last few years or 10 years, we have been talking much and doing less. Now we are in a brink of a situation that if we don't act now, the situation is going to turn very bad, and we will in our own lifetime will be able to see the repercussions of our inactions towards the climate change crisis which is happening. So all these things put together for any business organization, whether it's a downstream industry, automotive industry, or energy supplier industry, these three things combined together pose a serious challenge in terms of the leadership, how to respond to such a situation in a way where one part for any organization is to sustain their business. So if we talk of, when Sir was trying to explain that the fossil fuels are going to go away, being replaced by renewables or EVs or electrification is happening. But being in an oil and gas business or a gas industry, we have to see how do we sustain the business and continue to add value not just to the business but also to the society and the national growth of the nation. So there, how do we adopt new business models, whether it's adopting hydrogen or going into parallelly with renewable and decarbonization, setting our own targets for net zero. So I think I'll stop here. I've just shared a few thoughts on that topic.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. I think very important. I mean, you come from gas industry. You are the leader in the gas business in the country, and we see in the transition several scenarios. While the oil and coal, contribution in the primary energy is going down less than 50%, it is the gas only which is sustaining with a minor decrease in their primary, energy mix contribution, and perhaps goes beyond 2050 also. So I think that's the comfort. But then role of gas changes from region to region, and we'll discuss perhaps few things on that, your business. Vivek ji, what are your thoughts on, and what are the major things you'd like to share on a macro level from the organization point of view?
Thank you, and pretty mindful that we have already crossed the 62% time limit. So with that in mind, I'll confine myself to the most critical element that we got together to discussing, which is human capital. I think when we look at organizations, it is the human capital that distinguishes them. And that's where I would like to step back a minute and talk about what is this unprecedented challenges that we talk about. We use the word unprecedented, but in reality, what is happening is that volatility, turbulence, and disruption are the new norm. We can talk about VUCA, other terminologies, but the way I look at it is that these are the ones that present huge opportunities. So if you look at the past 5 years, let me also look at the positive side of it. Some of the companies have added value which was unfathomable at some point of time. Now, how did they do this? The reality is we all battle with existential challenges. If you look at what is driving change, after all, it is the society consists of individuals, and individuals is nothing but people. There are a couple of things which are driving people to behave the way they are doing and expect services, etc. One is climate crisis. Second is global health challenges. Third is changes in social values. These are three things that are driving, and what is evident on top of it, whether it's the globalization and geopolitics that are shifting the words tectonic plates. I think these are something very, very discernible when we look at the overall mass or how these things are emanating. How we live and work is being constantly reinvented by advances in technology and the emergence of generation, as we call, born digital, as we call it. So, there is a part that you mentioned about how do we prepare ourselves. What is important is when we prepare ourselves is to look categorically at what is it that is changing. What are the shifts that are happening in the last 5 years that are pretty evident. And when we look at them, we would be able to discern as to the path that we have to go about. First is, what is it and I'm talking purely from a leadership perspective or a CEO or a director perspective, what is it that we focus upon? Traditionally, the role was that of a manager, an efficient manager. It has transitioned to a visionary. And the mindset is that of moving from preservation of capital, resources, etc., to possibilities, which means no longer are people expecting, the shareholders are expecting about profits, EBITDA, etc. They are looking about what is the holistic impact you are creating. So that's the first and foremost change, which is in fact not only happening, but has already happened. Second is, what is value creation? How do we create value? There I would use the word planner versus architect. So leaders were known for managing things through scarcity. Now it's a question of how you manage abundance. I'll give you an example. Most of the companies which are famous or which are growing are the ones that have made open their platform. No longer it is about confining what you have and creating competitive advantage. To talk, since you mentioned how is your organization doing, we thought about a program called Waaree Experts, in which we look at the gig economy of about 1.5 lakh electricians, experts, people who have access to each of the homes and societies, etc. How do we transition them not for ourselves, but for their well-being, where they grow their income from 15,000 to 40,000, but also become part of what they service for competition? Now that's the platform we are creating, and the kind of traction it is getting clearly shows that you now need to work in an environment not just of competition, but about co-creation and collaboration. How do we organize is the third thing. It's a question of director versus catalyst. Mindset is that of authority, which is nothing wrong, versus partnership. So the whole context now is changing to command versus collaboration. That's the new generation's expectation. How do we get work done? It's no longer about a leader, a controller, but it's about a coach. The role has now, the mindset that is required is more of a creation, more of a discovery rather than certainty. It is a control versus evolution phenomenon that we are clearly seeing. And the fifth is, how do we show up? That means, how do we present ourselves not only to the society but to the organization? Previously we said, be professional. The mantra now is, be humane, which means conformity is out of the box. If you look at most of the leaders, people are expecting more of authenticity and spontaneity. It is a question more not about expectation. It is a question about how authentic you are even in your expectations. These are some of the generational changes that are being traversed. What it means for a leader is, no longer are you a leader in chief. You are basically a learner in chief. The way technology is evolving, the way business models are evolving, you need to be now seen as a learner in chief. Most importantly, innovation is no longer the buzzword. It is how do you actually forced acceleration of innovation is the new mantra. So that's what I think are some of the generational changes happening, and we are trying to adapt, adopt, and create around that.
Thank you, Vivek ji. Very nice, very elaborate on this thing. I mean, just to focus on some of the core issues. When we talk about future-ready leaders, would you be able to share some of these specific initiatives to develop people for being future-ready? And from the leadership point of view, you talked about. Do you think that in the last 2-3 years there have been change in the leadership style? And what kind of changes in the leadership style that you recognize have been mainly come into that? If you can talk
Thank
about
you.
that.
I think there's a concept of situational leadership that all HR people talk about. There has never been a time which is more pertinent than now to actually practice it. And when I say situational leadership, I summarized it as saying more as a coach and a catalyst rather than a conformity and a leader. To me, that summarizes, because the kind of knowledge breakthroughs that have happened, it's physically impossible, actually impossible for anyone to be in the lead. How do you create not just a leader, but an ecosystem of leadership? Yes, we are still in organizations where hierarchies prevail and everything. but you need to be seen as a facilitator of an ecosystem of leaders rather than as a leader of people. I think that's the fundamental change. Second is being top of technology and being top of business models is no longer a choice. It's something that comes without saying. You would not even find a place as a leader. Third is external scrutiny. We now need to realize, from my own experience when we were going public or everything, the kind of questions that are coming in are no longer around EBITDA, profitability, business model. In fact, investors themselves say, you cannot predict many things that you're talking about. But we want to see the talent pipeline, the human capital. How are you going to manage? What is it that new or innovation that you can think of? So increasingly now people are talking about how is this management going to leverage the unpredictability, uncertainty, and the turbulence to stay ahead of the curve. These are some of the changes that I can say I'm
All
clearly
these
seeing.
initiatives, you had your internal processes or you had somebody outside also to help you work on that? I mean, that's very important from the, you develop your indigenous processes and system and implement them.
The word is a pool of infinite resource other than time being the only finite element. So in the interest of time, I can say it's physically impossible, rather impossible to have only one source, which is internal or people. We leverage every expert, every body, and
Collaborated on
I
that, yeah.
say that professional networking and collaboration is the way to go. Internally, we are clearly looking at, we do not, I mean, I can clearly say, we do not have that talent density and bench strength because the way the business has evolved. And that's the first and foremost thing to develop. We are not as fortunate as BPCL, Reliance, GAIL, and the company that you were chairman of, to have that kind of a talent density. And that's the first and foremost thing to develop.
Okay. Thank you very much for insight. Ayush ji, I know you represent one of the biggest and perhaps the leader in the gas business, and you are an international company now, working in several countries, sourcing from many other countries on that. How do you prepare, how you have process to develop, and how do you see it? What do you mean by future-ready leaders? And again, do you think in the last couple of years, internally, in the working of GAIL, has there been any change, significant change in the leadership style or working style?
See, one thing which over the past few years, how the definition of future-ready leaders is changing. And I see earlier when we talked about the leadership, we used to talk about some predefined action plan or responses from leaders in a particular situation or a business scenario, or whether, like sir talked about the situation leadership. In a particular situation, a leader was supposed to act in a particular way. But how it is changing is now that how did they respond to a particular situation, that has to be dynamic. There is no preset formula or a recipe based on which a leader can act and come out of a situation like COVID or these crisis situations. So the definition of leadership with the fast changing technology, with crisis situations, abnormal situations, normal situations, the whole definition of future-ready leader is changing. So the future leaders have to be able to respond to any kind of a situation which could not have been thought before or anticipated before, for which a solution or prescription could have been given by anyone. So that is one critical element which has to be brought in by within all the leaders, whether they are in a public sector, private sector, small enterprise, big enterprise, home enterprise. So this is something which needs to be done. And for being able to achieve that kind of a quality or leadership style, I feel two most important things which are again different from what is being done earlier was, one is a leader needs to have a deliberate calm in themselves. And when I say deliberate calm, I would like to say it's basically a well-grounded individual faced in a crisis situation where he knows that he is in the midst of the crisis and it's going to be very difficult to lead or steer the organization and the people in such a situation. But then in such a situation also he is able to maintain calm and think through the situation and possibly navigate the organization into that crisis situation and to believe that we'll be able to come out in a very successful manner. And that brings to the second quality which I would like to mention here is the bounded optimism in such a situation also. That remaining grounded, being aware of the uncertainty or the volatility of the situation, in such situation also he is able to maintain an optimism that they together with their team will be able to successfully navigate and bring out the organization successful. And like Vinayji, Srivastava said, that we'll also be able to find solutions or make that challenge or threat into convert it into an opportunity to grow further and take the people ahead.
No, excellent. I think that's exactly what you talked about is came up in the latest Harvard reviews, that some of the competencies, skills that are required to be seen or built in people to be able to work and have high performance during VUCA, BANI or RUPT kind of a scenario, which is going to be perhaps normal, as you say, in coming time. So how do you create people, develop people who are comfortable with this kind of turbulent working, uncertainty? I mean, that's the challenge here, and that's very important. One of the Harvard review thing has come out that you have to be calm, you can take your quality decisions if you are calm there. Very. I'll also extend this, Ayushji, this thing. During this period, the learning a different kind of urgency to respond to aspirations of clients and also to really look after the employees as such. Were there any significant change on the people's policies, people dealing with your employees, some significant thing you'd like to share on that?
One thing which, especially coming out of the COVID, in terms of the policy changes and how do we deal with the employees per se, we have always talked about the physical health of the people, but one thing which has come to the focus is also to focus upon the mental and emotional health of the well-being of the people. So that is one thing where, as GAIL also a lot of changes we have trying to bring in, where we focus not just on the physical health, but also the mental and emotional well-being, because that is the one thing which has taken the biggest hit in such a situation. So that is, I think, if I have to say one thing, that is the most important thing.
Thank you. Vivekji, what would you like to say?
I couldn't agree more. As they say, we in India knew for several thousands of years, physical health is an outcome of your mental and emotional well-being. We are seeing that in the organizations pretty categorically. So the recent study that came out of McKinsey, that what is the employee expectation? Policies are nothing but meeting employee expectations. The employee expectations, 70% of the people now think that they are in need of active policies and participation by the organization for their mental and emotional well-being, along with their physical health. So now we are seeing, and while I can cite policies from individual organizations, that this is no longer a hygiene factor. This is becoming a distinguishing factor. So while people are struggling with, do we have flexi times? Those are all things of the past. How do we go about it? Monitoring physical, mental, emotional health being, having clear parameters for it, and dealing with that proactively, rather than when something happens, is, I think, going to be, moving forward, one of the most critical elements of policy making.
Something on how do you really go about actually
so again,
with the people?
There is, the best thing to do is to encourage peer-level conversations. I think while we still want to talk about how people will open up to their leaders, etc., but what we have observed is that people actually leave a lot of hints, traces to their peer-level conversations. Now, it is up to us, how do we encourage people to come out with that and not being seen as emotionally weak or somebody who is, just struggling at work, but actually facilitating those initial hints so that something can be done. And because workplace is going to become stressful. That's the reality. As the demands grow of leaders, and I always say, it is always in praise of followers. People talk about leaders, but more importantly, it is in praise of followers, people who give their lives, who turn around everything. And stress levels are going to go up when you're dealing with uncertainty versus uncertainty, turbulence, etc. Important thing is to let people feel free to precipitate, surface, and feel it is the normal thing to do.
Yeah, to come out and share itself requires a bit of challenge.
If I can add, Malayan, that is really important, which I feel I must share with you also. Within the organization, and especially if I talk of Indian context, the biggest barrier, we all realize the importance is there, we talk about it, but still the biggest barrier on emotional and mental well-being is to accept it as an issue within the leaders, within the organization, that this is a growing concern for every organization. Last week only I was fortunate enough to attend a conference in US on SHRM, and where 50% of the discussions for a 4-day conference was on mental and emotional well-being of the people. They had an exposition. 50% of the exposition stalls were talking about mental and emotional well-being, including pet therapy and those things. So this is what the world is going through, and it's only a matter of time before we see the outcomes and problems arising out of it. And if we don't respond it now, it will be too late before the organization will suffer because of these issues. And the employees and their families will suffer if we don't act now.
No, I think very clearly this is, has emerged as one of the major issues, and I think most of the organizations have built in specific initiatives to really meet this challenge. Coming back to energy, how have you sort of looked at and provoked your team in the organization to look at quantifying climate change impacts, or how do you deal or promote decarbonization in your teams? Actually, I'm talking like as your HR team, Ayush ji, particularly in HR. What kind of initiatives you have taken as a leader of your team in your own organization with respect to climate change, decarbonization, some of the initiatives?
See, one thing which is especially driven from the top management, and to provide a clear vision to the employees about the realization of the energy transition which is happening, to accept that being in the fossil fuel business or being in the gas business, the next few years or maybe 20 to 30 years or 40 years at the most for gas also, it's going to change. So we have, as an organization, set a very clear target of achieving the net zero goals, and where we have stated that scope 1 and scope 2 emissions will reduce by 2040. So we have set a very aggressive target when the organization or the country as a whole is talking about 2070. Being in a fossil fuel business, we are talking about a target of 2040 to achieve those things. And to translate those, it's not just a statement of achieving that, then there's a defined action plan which has been given to all the departments, all the sections of the business, including HR, that how do we achieve these things. So when we talk of HR, it's also talking about the bringing behavioral changes in how do we consume energy within our homes, within our life cycle, within our offices. How do we act as a leaders or
that's very difficult
walk
part,
the talk?
Bring about a behavioral change.
So unless we are able to bring a behavioral change in the attitude or behavior of the individual, he is not going to look at the target when he goes to the workplace. So as we say, hum badlenge to jag badlega, so it's something like that only. Unless we are able to bring that behavioral change in the individual, the organizational target is not going to be achieved. So that is one of the focus which HR has taken.
One or two initiatives.
So
example
there I wanted to go. So how to bring about that behavioral change? So a lot of awareness programs, training programs are being done in a focused manner, where the importance of these things are being talked about. And again, we talk about theory a lot, but people will learn more from experience. So how do we expose to the best practices being adopted by organizations across the world? So we are trying to identify where such practices are being sent. We are trying to send people out there to see it and believe it by themselves, and then come back and adopt and practice those in the
Great. I think that's very important that for all of us to take away. I think how conscious are we to calculate your own carbon footprints? How much carbon footprints you have created in a day? And are you conscious that by changing your lifestyle, your ways, consumption of energy particularly, is there any way you can reduce it by 10% or 5% or 15%. I mean, that kind of initiative. You know, all initiatives for organization all actually start from individual employee. So I think that's one important thing that I'll sort of throw it to all the participants here. Look at your carbon footprints and make a target of your own self that in maybe in weeks' time or a month's time, I will reduce it by 5% or 10%. Do it diligently, and I think your contribution would be really terrific overall to your organization and also the nation. So very good initiative on that. How about Vivek ji, some of the points that you want to share? Yeah, we'll just finish here.
Okay. So quickly, one of the things that all organizations are doing is ESG, and it is looking more as a outward from out to in, because you need to have that and in conformity of that. There's another way of looking at it is how do we make it in to out, basically. Whatever ESG policies, etc. are being built in, they need to be participative, because we've just started our journey. So that's one initiative without detailing into that. How each policy, be it from XYZ department, is explained to everyone so that everyone embraces and understands how they would be evaluated by the society, not just by the investors. Second is, we talk about affordable and accessible energy, and we are building it into the business model so that people understand what they have to do. We have a team of about 100 franchisee managers and people who are trying to democratize solar and other forms of storage energy at every home. We say every rooftop is a solar plant. So going about that, we try and explain what are the possibilities and how this will benefit the people, not just from a clearly egalitarian view of how it will benefit a company, etc. The second part is affordability in terms of, so rather than tell our factory people, you have to reduce losses from 3 to 2%, we talk about from 5 to 2% means 20 paise per watt. And this is going to actually make energy more affordable. So those are some of the things that we keep trying to have creative dialogues around that.
Thank you. These are some practical ways of really propagating that. Thank you very much. I think we don't have much time here, but I think we just make a point that from the general public's point of view, people have started looking companies not just from the profit point of view. They look at organizations who are absolutely climate sensitive. They are much more energy efficient, and they are conscious of their practices in this. And that's how the investors are becoming very, very choosy now, and therefore it is actually being driven to the core values of all the companies, organizations there. So it's becoming very important. So we can discuss many things, but I think because of the time constraint, I'd like to thank my two eminent panelists here. Thank you very much for your very valuable, very nice interventions. So thank you very much.